Hi.
So, your script, The Time Traveler's Ronde.
Yeah.
I failed French, so I had to look up Ronde again. I believe it means round.
Yeah.
Was on the 2016 blacklist, and as many writers know, the blacklist is probably, in addition to the Nichols Fellowship, one of the more prestigious ways for an amateur writer to kind of break into the industry. So I want to talk about that and how you got, your script got on the blacklist. But I want to start with what you did right after graduating from DePaul.
Okay, yeah. So right after finishing from DePaul, I actually moved to San Francisco because my girlfriend at the time, and now fiance actually, she had like a job opportunity, and we were at that stage in our relationship where it was like, she was like, okay, well, I'm going to San Francisco, and I was like, oh, well. I would go out there too. So I did, and then while I was there, I had a couple of odd jobs. You should know this too. The first job that I applied to after getting my degree from college was at an ice cream store that I did not get the job for, which is terrible.
Always happy.
Terrible. But I ended up working. I did a lot of videography, like freelance videography. My main client was actually like the police department in San Francisco. So I made like their workplace training videos, which was a fascinating job that. Ask me about it, I'll tell you all.
Yeah, but you also like were more primarily a directing student in addition to being a writer, but you weren't like purely a writer. You were.
Yeah, well, I think I graduated with a concentration in screenwriting, but was also directing, directing short films the whole time I was at school too. And so I had a production background also, and so had those skills where I could, produce those workplace training videos. And then the nice thing about that job was it paid well enough where I could like pay the rent. And I could live off of it, but I was only working 20, 25 hours a week. So it gave me a lot of time to write. And then after that, it was the most difficult thing was using that time wisely. and like forming the discipline.
How many scripts do you think you wrote during that time period?
I like walked away with at least like what one might confuse for a script after DePaul. I think I was like 150 pages long, and I was like, only just breaking into Act 3. So I was like looking at that being like, I didn't do this right. So I like took that same premise and changed all the characters' names so I couldn't copy and paste anything. And I just started that over. And that same premise, so I rewrote that script and then like finished that, and it was still very bad. And so, but it was like, I was like learning how to write a little bit better, and so I kept a portion of it. I would say like 10 to 20%, and then rewrote everything else.
In this whole time, are you just doing self-evaluation, or were you giving it to friends to critique or anything, or just? I
was doing self-evaluation, and I was giving it to some friends also, some like other DePaul alums, and so rewrote that. So I wrote that first screenplay like 3 times, and then after that I wrote another feature, and that was the one that actually ended up getting me repped before Time Travelers. So Time Travelers was.
Oh, it was after that one then?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then what did you do though? Because I think that's a dilemma a lot of writers face, is that you accumulate this sort of portfolio of work and then deciding like, now who do I send it to if I don't know anyone?
Yeah,
right?
Nobody. You send it to no one.
Right, so it just starts collecting dust, which is very sad.
Yeah.
So how did you even, like, what was that step of like, okay, now that I have this content, what am I going to do with it? Where did you just like Google like what to do with my screenplay? Or?
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, sometimes you hear stories about people sending in query letters, and that's how I've heard stories where people say, "Oh yeah, that's how I broke in, was through a query letter." It's
very sad endeavor, the query letter, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think I wrote like 10 query letters, and I said I can't do this anymore. I think I was pretty much resigned to the idea that I would never. I was still like hopeful, and I was like, I set out to write a feature that I could produce. So I was like, I'm gonna write a feature that I could theoretically produce for, some astronomically small amount of money, where it could just be like me and a sound guy and a cameraman and 2 actors for 90% of the movie, and like on the road. So I was like, that. As I started writing it, that story kind of like, stories sort of like have minds of their own, and I felt myself fighting where the story wanted to go, so that I could be this thing that I could theoretically produce. How? I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to do it anyway. So I just kind of conceded to the story and let it be something like a little bit bigger than what I was originally intending. and kind of was under the assumption, was like, I guess I'm just going to write this, and I'd kind of resigned to the idea. It's like, I will just write screenplays for the rest of my life, and hopefully when I die, my grandchildren will find a box full of them, and maybe they'll read them. But during that time, the Blacklist, which is like the annual list that comes out every year, Franklin Leonard, who started that annual list, he started a website, kind of like addressing this exact issue, where it's like, what does a writer do if they don't have immediate connections into the industry, if they don't have an uncle, if they don't have a friend who's already working, there's no one to pass the screenplay to. What do you do? And like the answer is, you know, do the Nichols Fellowship, win the Nichols.
Essentially, yeah.
Or
and there's
nothing
like
else.
7,500 submissions typically for that, so that's not like a easy thing to do, right?
Totally, yeah. And like art is subjective, and so you might not advance in the Nichols, and you might have a really great script. So the other option is to move to Los Angeles and like try to network, but that's like not viable for a lot of people, right? And so he said, I'm going to start a website where writers can upload scripts on one end. And if you guys already know about the website, then I apologize. But and on the other end, producers and reps can then download them. Let's say, and then you can like fill in keywords like, oh, my script is about like cowboys, and it has like a female lead this age, and you put all these keywords, and then a producer on the other end is like, I really want a female lead cowboy movie. I think we're onto something for this movie too. Look, I think we should all write this. And in the meantime, in the interim, you can have evaluations for that script, which is kind of nice because it's not just your friends being like, it's really great, dude. These are strangers, and they're professional readers who work at like studios who on the side are just doing this, and you can get feedback that way. And so if you have a screenplay that's done well, like these readers are rating them. If you get rated well, then you get a little bit of attention from the Blacklist, and your script gets sent out to folks. And so through that, like that's where the break came. I had a script that did well on the Blacklist website.
And this was not the one this is a different script.
This was
right?
prior to Time Travelers, yeah. That did well on the website, and then a writer who named Brian Duffield, who's also producing now, he was on the Blacklist website, and he actually has a funny story where he says, oh, I was in New York and I went to go see Hamilton, and it's like, he's like, but it was so good I couldn't go to sleep afterwards. Like, I know what I'll do, I'll read a screenplay, it'll put me to bed. And that's how he found my script. He said, oh, I really liked it, like I read the whole thing, I couldn't go to bed. So I owe a thank you to Lin-Manuel Miranda. So he read it and said, oh, I'm interested in like maybe trying to develop this, and in the meantime, are you repped? Can I send this to my managers? And I said, yes. Do it right now. So that's how like I broke in with like reps. That's how I got managers. And then on the phone call so during that time, it's like, okay, I've put my script on the Blacklist, like hopefully something comes of this, and fixating on it and being like, I need to write something else.
So quickly though, because I think that's also interesting. So when he sends it to the manager, so that's not automatic either, right? So like,
No.
Did you have to fly to LA to meet with them? Was that over Skype, or how did that even, to get to the point where they wanted to sign you? Because usually, a manager is going to be interested in you if you have something that's about to sell, or there's a lot of heat behind you.
Right.
And it's, typically they don't venture into, signing somebody unless they see kind of a long-term success. Like they see that this writer has an insane amount of talent that they could.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. What they would tell me is that they loved the script and they had to sign me. What they might tell you is like, oh, I don't know, like, oh, this really hot writer that we have sent us the script, and we want to make him happy, so maybe we'll sign this guy too. I don't know, probably somewhere in between those two things. But then also, it's like Brian was interested in producing it, and so it had a little bit of like energy behind it, where it's like, oh, maybe this can become a thing for this client, this potential client. And so in the first phone call, I had a phone call with them, and they liked the script, and they said like, we're interested in working with you. And I was like, cool. And then I hung up the phone like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Am I repped? And during that phone call, they said, oh, do you have anything else? And I was just finishing Time Travelers then. And
did you pitch that to them then on the phone?
On the phone, yeah. And they were like, Time Travelers is like a tough one to pitch. And so they were like, huh, okay, I don't know. And I was like, I think we should maybe just read it. And then they liked it when they read it.
Yeah. So then they signed you right after that then?
They signed me after Carolina, the other script, and then but I think Time Travelers was the one that really started to, like, they could send out to other folks that started to get me meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about that then, and then how that script kind of, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, blew up, that they got you a lot more attention then from that. How did that, so did they immediately, once you send it to them, that's when things started to develop, or how did that all of a sudden get around town enough to where it then appeared on the blacklist?
Yeah, so with Time Travel, it was like a really fun experience, because it was like I had, like, for that window in time, this like hot script in Hollywood, and I was like going to my job at the police department with this like little secret. But so yeah, it was like I think it's an unusual script, and it was like I think an unusual premise, and it was like a tough thing to stick the landing.
Can you pitch it really quick to us, because it is very it's unconventional. For
yeah.
sure.
So the short pitch is that it's like a series of love stories that take place 500 years after time travel has been invented, and so what does time travel look like in this world? It's like, Matt, you and I could be like sitting on an airplane and meeting each other and getting to talking, and I'd be like, oh, cool, like, where are you from? And you're like, oh, I'm from Paris. And I say, oh, no kidding, I'm from Paris too. When do you live? And you're like, the 25th century. And I say, cool, the future, I'm in the 1960s. Like, oh, I love the 60s. And I'm like, yeah, but it's changing. So it's like time is almost like the way people in this world talk about time the way that we talk about, like, what neighborhood should I move in when I move to Chicago? And the story follows, like, there's an old Ophuls film that I watched here in, like, a history of film class, thank God, called Ronde. And it's the structure is where you have, like, it's a love story between two characters, and character A and character B, and then character B goes off and has a relationship with character C, and C has a relationship with D, until the last character ends up running back into the first character. So that's the structure I used, and it's like they're all ping-ponging out of time. So I pitched that, and they were like, I don't know.
Right, I was going to say, that's not usually an idea that executives are going to welcome with open arms.
Exactly,
like, I
yeah.
don't get it, right?
But so I think for enough folks, it worked on the page. I'm sure there are plenty of people that I haven't talked to who are like, I hate this, and I hate the guy who wrote it, because it's pretty divisive. But
did you know that? Because we were talking briefly about that. But did you have that sense going in, where it was like people are either going to love this or absolutely hate it?
No, I kind of just thought that I was really nervous because you have, you're on page 40, right? And it's like, page 40 should look and feel a certain way when you're reading a feature-length screenplay. Like, you should kind of know where you are in the movie. And that's just the nature of how stories are told, right? And it's like, I guarantee you right now, if you went home and you turned on TBS and there's some movie that you have never seen, just by the way they're filming it, could probably, if you've never seen it, just like, you could watch for 5 minutes and be like, I feel like we're in the third act. Like, you would just know. And so my script, when you're on page 40, it's like the characters that you just met in the first scene don't exist anymore. And you like met one guy who like traveled off and did something with another person. Now I'm following this other person. And at that point, I was thinking that a reader would think like, this guy doesn't know how to tell a story. Yeah. And then I was just hopeful that and it was a good exercise in trying to make sure that those scenes really worked in and of themselves. Like these sequences between these characters worked. So if nothing else, they'd be like, okay, this guy can write, and I'll watch the next sequence until they figured out, oh, there's a pattern. And then hopefully by the end they'd say, oh, it ends where it begins. That's fun.
Was it just like a fight against like convention and classic 3-act storytelling, or was it more of like this idea of like this just fits the story that I want to tell?
Right. I really loved the form, actually. In fact, like I mentioned Ophuls, the filmmaker, before, but I originally discovered the form here in Chicago doing improv. And there's an improv form called Ronde, and I loved performing it because I would find that people in the second scene would like kind of pause at some question that very organically people in like the fifth scene would answer, and you just found these like, you could find theme embedded into the structure of Ronde very organically, and things just kind of like presented themselves, these like big profound ideas like so naturally. And so I really fell in love with that form, and I wanted to In fact, at DePaul, my first one of my first shorts was The Pickpockets, Ronde, where it was like you follow these thieves all stealing the same briefcase from each other. So I really loved that form. And so it wasn't trying to like subvert expectations as far as the 3-act structure. In fact, I really concentrated on the 3-act structure a lot, or just structure paradigms in general, because again, like maybe this isn't a traditional story, but you know, page 40 should feel like page 40, and so I wanted to make sure that the audience felt that way, even though they weren't thinking, even though the story itself wasn't quite what they're not used to reading.
Right.
I don't know if any of this is making sense.
No, I think, and it's interesting because that's always a dilemma too, is that I think if you are writing something really, really creative like that and taking risks and chances and breaking all these pre-existing conventions and rules, is that is a way to get discovered. And I think we were talking about this too, that even though that can get you discovered, at the same time when you start going on all these meetings, then they try to take that creativity though and then repackage it in a more conventional way. I was wondering, have you found that to be the case when you're going into some of these meetings now, that you're getting, are they saying like, we love that script, but now we want you to do Iron Man 7? You know, like,
right.
not necessarily that movie, but
right. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it would be awesome. It's like, yes, I would.
They were like,
Iron Man on the Ronde.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I've had those conversations like with, as far as, I think, okay, there's two answers, right? As far as the Time Travelers, Ronde, no, they're the producers, like the folks who are developing it and they're going out to directors, like in our notes process, they were really precious of the story itself. And they didn't ask for a lot of like commercial changes. There's like a lot of French in the movie. Why not? No one's gonna read this. I'm writing it, like no one's gonna read it. Might as well put French in. And you know, they didn't ask me to take that. But I imagine that you know, there's a $80 million version of this movie, and there's maybe a $20 million version of this movie. And so, once if they put together a package and then they start to go to studios or independent financiers, like the changes I will end up having to make are different depending on who the director is and like who's financing it. So, but so far, no. Separately from that, reps are like, you should write something more commercial, and I get that.
Yeah. Are your other scripts more, would you say, more conventional, or also taking risks as well?
No, I mean, the one that got me repped was called Carolina, and that was like, it felt like an independent film. It's like it'll probably be an independent film, I would imagine. But it's you know, like a $10 million budget thing, and it's about this young woman in rural West Texas who's seduced into this life of crime by this mysterious con man, and it kind of goes through their escapades, like conning people and then robbing banks, and so I don't know. I guess that's like a crime thriller, which is a little bit more like traditional.
Yeah, it's an easier selling, you know, in terms of writing assignments, probably to send something out like that. Whereas if you were to send the other, it's a little bit harder to kind of even place what genre it is, right?
Totally, yeah.
Which for executives can be confusing.
Right, but I think as far as like writing things on your own too, it's just like you want to develop your voice, and like frankly, like that's what people are reading. So it's like, you know, Time Travelers Ronde was a movie that Disney will never make, but like it opened the doors at Disney, and I started having meetings there because the development executives there really loved it. And so, what they're looking for, and it's like they're all cinephiles, so just like us.
Because that's would be unexpected, right? That the Disney you seem surprised by that. So what's that like going into Disney first off? And then just
so fun. Yeah, of course, it's so awesome.
Do you get mouse ears when you walk in, or is
they give you mouse ears. Nice. Mickey's there, like hi, hi Tom. No, it's super fun. It's like the coolest thing in the entire world. And then like you go into a meeting, especially in the beginning, you like going like meeting development executives and like these general meetings, and you're like, oh my god, this is so cool. And you like go and you sit down with them, and then you kind of just meet them and you leave, and then nothing ever happens. But sometimes project will, you'll start to like, you'll build a relationship or you'll work on something eventually. But
well, when you first start going into those types of meetings, even going, how much are your reps prepping you on that, or are they just saying, hey, just be over at the lot at this time, and they want to talk to you?
Yeah, I think that they were really good about like, hey, if you have any questions. I think before the first couple, I was the first few meetings were people about potential like producers for Ronde, and so that was sort of like the thing. They're like, oh, they want to meet with the writer, and here are ideas, and like here are some things that we would be considering for notes, and having that conversation. Eventually, those just turned those meetings. Once I got down to LA and I started to go to meetings and meeting people in person, I think very early on they said, kind of gave me like a layout of what that was going to be like. But it is just like conversations like this one. It's like, what kind of movies are you interested in? Like, what are you working on now? Like, they'll tell you like, oh, this is what our company does, and like, this is the types of movies and stories that we're looking for. And so, if you ever think that you have an idea that would fit this brand, let me know, and then hopefully we can develop it together.
Did they have you pitch on any other like projects that they currently had in development at all?
I pitched on one project that was like kind of like a page 1 rewrite.
Did you know about that going in though? I'm assuming they prepped you on that, or were they just in the room like, hey, do you have an idea for this franchise? Or
actually, that came independent of even a general meeting. Like somebody I think read Time Travelers and said, oh, maybe this is somebody that could rewrite this. They went to my agents and just said, is Tom interested in pitching on this story? To which I said yes, and that was a fun experience. And it's like, if a pitch goes well, then you think, that was something I was not prepared for. It's like, oh, the pitch went really well. I was like super scared, and I like went in there and I pitched, and they seemed to like it, and I was like, okay, at least it's over. I never have to do that again. And then they're like, well, they really like it. They want you to come back in and pitch to this other person. It's like, no. And then, that guy really likes it. Like, come back in and pitch to these people.
Because a lot of this stuff I think we were talking to, where you weren't necessarily like prepared or didn't really know what to expect. So I mean, a lot of it's been kind of a learning as you go along.
Yeah, you kind of just rock and roll and figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, so what were some of the mistakes that maybe you felt like you made in some of those early meetings that you no longer do, or things that you thought were going to be a big thing that turned out to be like not that important? Because like one of the things you mentioned, which I think that people may not realize, is that on these generals where you get called in because you have this heat behind you from being on the blacklist and people are interested in meeting you, that it is really just that, where they're just talking to you about like what movies you like and what ideas do you have, as opposed to going in there expecting a formal 20-minute story pitch.
Totally, yeah. I think that the lesson that I learned quickly, and that honestly like kind of like absolved me of a lot of anxiety, was, oh, okay, I'm going into this meeting, like this is somebody that I need to impress because they can get me a job, and like I can finally do this for real, like full time. And kind of realizing that that's not, you don't go into a general meeting and get offered a job. Sometimes they'll say, oh, you know what, now that you're in here and listening to you talk, like we have this one book and you should read it and let us know what you think. There'll be things like that, but you're not really walking out. It's kind of just, you're just networking essentially. And they're getting a vibe for you. And so just being yourself and like being a person and talking about like the movies that you love and why you love them. And yeah, I guess like that was the lesson that I learned. And like,
what about actual pitching though? Then when you are expected to go in, do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, so I told the story earlier during like the pitch fest because everyone had their pitches memorized. And I found it very, very impressive because I tried to do that for my first pitch. And had I been as prepared as you guys all were who participated this morning, I would have gotten the job. But I was not that prepared. Or I thought that I was that prepared, and then I walked in and I just like blanked. And it was awkward and it was excruciating, and it took like 45 minutes.
To actually get through your pitch?
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, and then, oh, shoot. And then I think I like pulled out my computer at one point and like opened it because I got so lost. It was awful. It was as silent as it is right now in me telling the story. And so I didn't ever do that again. Now I bring in my iPad, and that's like, I have everything written out, and I've like gone through it a quadrillion times, and it's like it's like each sentence is its own line, and I can like look at the sentence and then like be like, oh yeah, and then like look up and engage. And a lot of folks like bring in like PowerPoints and stuff, or like bring in photographs.
Yeah. And you haven't done that, gone to that extent?
I haven't done that yet because it's like just enough for me to be like, this is like the move I've got down. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, so where's the project at currently then? So now that it's been making the rounds and you're going out, and are you still, it's looking for a director? Is that where you're at with
Time Travelers?
Yes.
Yeah. So with Time Travelers, well, it's interesting because I'm on like parallel tracks for both of those scripts. So they're both like in development, and it's interesting seeing how something that could be a potential like studio movie like Time Travelers, I think is like at least like right now seems to be like the strategy where it's like bring on a high profile director and like that can attach high profile talent and then sell it to a studio so that's their strategy. On Caroline, which is a smaller movie, it's they go talent first, and so they're trying to attach talent and directors kind of simultaneously, and seeing firsthand how the thing is built is interesting. And so both are essentially in the same place, but they're kind of at different levels.
Yeah, because you're at this waiting period of trying, because that can affect what the budget's going to be, obviously, right? So if you get a certain high-profile director or actor attached to it, then that changes things drastically. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And in more than one way, right? That changes things dramatically. Like, oh, this could really likely be made now.
Mm-hmm.
And then now it's their story, right? Like now it's whatever they want, and I'm like, for sure, okay, cool.
Right.
And they can be like, I hate you, go away, and like bring on somebody else. I'll be like, oh no. And so.
So you're willing and able to make changes if they want to? Because there is not that your script is identical, but also just in the sense that it's an unconventional screenplay, because the backstory for like Groundhog Day is somewhat similar, where it was, the original draft of that was this sort of existential narrative, and then when they were going to bring on Harold Ramis and Bill Murray, they wanted to make it this other thing, and he had this choice to make of going this indie route and keeping the spirit of the original, or taking it in this new commercial direction.
What did he do?
Well, there's a movie called Groundhog Day.
Okay. I wasn't
right?
sure if he was like, no, I need to preserve the integrity of the script, and they said, I find we'll hire someone else.
And then but I think Harold Ramis did a bunch of rewrites and stuff on it too to get it to where it is now. But I'm curious, would you be willing to sacrifice your initial vision for that in order to get it made, or would you hold, true to that vision that you?
Right. I mean, that's a good question. There's a lot to be said for. I would articulate if they wanted to substantively change what the core of the story is, I would probably lobby against that. But I'm also of the mind, like, I'm a very collaborative person. I think it comes from doing improv, so it's like I'm really into doing notes. People seem to hate notes and think that notes are bad. But I'm really into it, and I think. On the last panel that was mentioned too, it's like trying to figure out like the note behind the note, like what is keeping the person, like they're offering a solution that maybe isn't the right solution, but then articulating why. It's like, what, I thought about why you had this solution, but I think the real problem is this, and this is how I'm going to address that. Yeah. And because it forces you to look at the project in a new way. If there was something that I was like really against, I would probably just say like, I don't know how to do that. I don't know. I'll let you know. We'll do this again.
The right answer is yes. Just be like, yes. How many zeros are you going to add to the?
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm not saying.
Yeah. No. I think. But because I think that's interesting that you are so receptive to notes too. Because again, if you ever have a chance to read, or if the movie gets produced in its current form, I think you'll see this. Continuity of vision that I think a lot of screenplays lack, that I was immediately, like reading 10 pages of your script, just saw right away. It was like, this person clearly has a really strong grasp of the world and the characters and the story that they're trying to tell. And when you have that, sometimes it's almost like you've labored over the material so much that it's hard for other people then to question it, because it's like you've already second-guessed yourself. I'm assuming you've second-guessed yourself so many times that it's like I've already thought about any issue you could potentially have with it. Right. So like that you're receptive to notes, then that's kind of interesting to me. Why is, or like, what I'm saying, like what do you find interesting about those notes, or how are they helpful to you?
Right. So what I have not done is gone through an experience where I was a hired gun. It's like, oh, we have this book, we want to hire a writer and to adapt it, and so and it's just I'm part of the machine, and then they're getting the pages and being like, we want to change these big things, and maybe offering solutions that I don't agree with. I haven't gone through that experience. I think the experience that I've gone through were things that people read and they liked, and so that's why they wanted to develop it. So the notes that they were giving, they were coming from the same place. Like, they understood the core of the story, they understood the idea, and they were saying, I think this can be more clear, or I think that it can be stronger if this character has this moment because it sets it up better over here, or whatever.
Do you ever find yourself pushing back on some of that too? Because in a script like that, even though it doesn't have like the tightest structure that you would normally see, there are things that I think that could derail a story like that very easily too, depending on the note that they're implementing. So do you find yourself pushing back, and is that difficult based on who's giving those notes? Or
like, not in the room. It's like in the room, I think it's like very much, again, like it's like a yes and mentality. It's like, okay, cool, like, yeah, and like oh yeah, it could also be like this, and we're like talking about it in a collaborative way. But then when it comes down to actually like sitting down and implementing the notes, I found myself saying, you know, I don't think I can do this, and so I wrote this like really long email that was like very like, not litigious in like diction, but like litigious in like I'm going to craft this argument. It's like, here's why I can't do this, and these are the reasons, and this is what we'll do to the script, and this is why it's bad, and I was like, you know, it was like a nicely worded email. It wasn't like extreme in it at all. It was polite. But I was like, I'm gonna send this, and if they like push back, I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna get all aggro. And then they were like, okay.
So you did send it?
I sent it, yeah, I sent the email, and they said, okay, cool, yeah, that's right, that's good. So I think it was about communicating, like, I thought really deeply about this note, and I don't think I can use the solution that we thought of in the room, but right, here's what I think the fundamental problem is, and here's how I think that it should be addressed. And this preserves these, whatever. That felt more effective.
I want to talk to you about your writing process as well, because again, when you're coming at these stories from kind of an unconventional approach where most people, you know, concept and going right to structure and character and stuff, like, how do you start writing a story? Like, where do you usually start with an idea, or are you more of a character person or an arena? Like, where do you start with, and how do you then start to frame the story out from there?
Right. There's like an Aaron Sorkin quote that I love, where he says, to the untrained eye, a lot of writing doesn't look very much like writing at all. In fact, to the untrained eye, writing looks a lot like watching college basketball on ESPN. And that's, I think, really true. It's like you spend a lot of time, maybe I'm not watching college basketball, but I'm probably watching like an Aaron Sorkin movie, or like The West Wing. It's a lot of thinking about it, right? And as far as character, I think I think of like feeling a lot. It's like, what does this? I have this image in my head, and like I know, like I can see how it opens. Like, what is that? And it's less about what is the story, and like what is that feeling, and like what kind of movie conveys that feeling, and then maybe starting to like watch those movies, and like building it very slowly and in your head, and just kind of thinking about it and like pondering it a lot. I think of it as like, I've usually describe it as like a glass filling with water. It's like the drops of water are all of these thoughts that are just coming up until it reaches the brim and begins to overflow. And it's like at that point you're like, oh shit, I better like start writing some of this down. And so you start writing. And so what I will do as far as like just beginning to write, I will just write random scenes. And sometimes I know really specifically what it is, like the character's name, but sometimes it's just like man and woman. And it's like this moment, this like line of dialogue, or like this like visual moment that like conveys this thing inside of this scene.
Is that more in an effort just to try to capture the tone that you're going for, or is it because at that point you're not really thinking about plotting it out or anything like that? It's just more about the vibe of the characters in the world.
Right. I think it was like I used to like write down notes, and I'd look at the notes and be like, I don't really like this. Doesn't do anything for me. Like this note, like whatever I felt when I wrote it down, I'm not feeling now as I'm reading it, and I was like, I should just skip the middleman and just like write the scene, like do this in Final Draft, and like that's how I most effectively communicate, is inside of Final Draft. And so I'll just write the actual scene as clearly as I can, and so I'll do that again. I'll do that with a different scene, and then all of a sudden that's like the second glass of water that is beginning to fill up with water, and until I get to the point where it's like, okay, I should like write the screenplay. And so I have these 15 to 20 like Final Draft documents inside of a folder, and thinking, okay, so how does this movie start? And like, oh, I actually already have the opening. So I go to that and like rewrite it and put it in on this master draft. And then, okay, I don't have the next sequence, but I have the third one, so I'll write the next sequence right now. And then I can just copy and paste that third sequence and put it in this master draft. And
so not a lot of outlining then, right? It's almost like you just have these scenes and then trying to find these bridges that will connect them throughout.
Right, yeah, but so, no outlining. I didn't learn how to outline. And essentially what the rough draft becomes is an outline, right? Because it's like, it's garbage. It's total garbage, and it's messy, and it's terrible, and I don't know how like the difference between there, and I'm like, ugh. So from there, it's like, okay, now I can think about, structure paradigms. Now I can think about like Sid Field and like Christopher Bolger, or like I really love this guy, John Wood, who did a book called Into the Woods. Wait, maybe John York, who did the book called Into the Woods, and he talks about a 5-act structure. So I think 5-act structure is kind of my favorite, but it's like I'll use any of them, like whatever like I can use. And that's when I started to think of like story structure, and going into that second draft, I'm thinking more about like structure in that way. Yeah. However, what I will say...
How long did that process take? Because it sounds like it would take potentially a while to get that going and go. And do you find that it takes longer doing it that way, or do you? Is that all kind of accelerated within a?
Yeah, it took a long ass time.
Yeah.
I mean, because it was. Yeah, I mean, what do I have? I'm working at the police department, like writing. But now working professionally, it's like what skill I did not have was breaking story before knowing what the idea was, right? Like, going and writing the way that I wrote before did not lend itself to becoming a professional screenwriter, because then it's like, oh, we have this premise and we're looking for pitches on it, and you want to pitch a full story, and so it's like in 2 weeks I have to do what used to take me 8 months.
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
hard.
like, this is Major League Baseball.
Right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's a much different, forcing yourself to move quickly through that process then, right?
Right, and so I was recently hired to write a treatment, and like that treatment is now I'm going to write the script for it. And like I'm like, shit, man, this treatment's so detailed. Like I'm going to write the script in like 2 weeks. Like I should have been doing this years ago. So it's been important for me over the past year, like since kind of breaking in, to like develop that tool to be able to break story quickly before. It's really lovely and wonderful to like organically find story, and I love that. But it doesn't lend itself to a business model, an efficient business model.
Yeah, for sure. So and then from San Francisco, you said you recently relocated to LA.
Yeah.
Which we haven't talked about. We've had a couple of guests, and our first one was from LA, and the other 2 guests who were here before saying they have either relocated or are going to. But what's Los Angeles like being a professional writer, and how is that? Has it been difficult to adjust to living in LA compared to San Francisco or Chicago or anywhere else you've lived?
I really love LA. Mm-hmm. I loved San Francisco. San Francisco now also is just like kind of like perpetually overhearing people talking about seed funding for their tech startups, which I didn't have any interest in, because I was like, who gives a and now I live in LA, where people are like perpetually talking about their movies being made, and it's like that I do care about. Like, ooh, interesting. So it's like the same thing in a different place, but like in a different industry, and I just preferred the new one. And I think I was like ready to like plug my nose and be like, oh, I gotta move to LA. Like I hate it there. Everyone does. And then I've really fallen in love with it. I really adore it a lot.
What specifically though? Just that kind of, like we were saying, that kind of community that perhaps you don't have in other cities, of other people just being in the industry.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I don't know what it is. Anyway, I'm happy. It feels like home immediately. So
yeah.
As far as like professionally, yeah, it's nice. It's nice to like becoming friends with other screenwriters and being able to like talk shop with them.
Did you feel like it was, because that's another thing where a lot of people are coming from Chicago or other places and that are going there. Do you feel like that's a necessary move? Is it something that your management company is saying, hey, if you really want to take this to the next level, you have to come to LA? Or is it just something you felt was going to give you the best opportunity to move forward? The
move to LA happened before I was signed. The idea to move to LA happened before I was signed. So I was like working at with the police, and they said, and it was like I liked the job because I only worked 20, 25 hours a week. But the nature of that job was changing. They were going to make it 40 hours a week, and like, a good city job where it's like with a pension and benefits. And I was like, probably take that job and like be a grown up. But I don't want to. I was like, I'm just young enough to like make one more stupid decision. So I was like, I'm gonna pack up. I'm gonna move to LA. And I said to my girlfriend, I was like, remember when I moved to San Francisco for you? Will you move to LA now? And she said, yeah. And so after making that decision, and I was just gonna like move down there and like drive Lyft, and or figure out what the job was, like something that could keep me writing. Mm-hmm. And then in between that decision and actually making the move, I got rep, so that worked itself out. I don't know if the secret is real, putting things out in the universe, but And this, with a sample size of 1 and me, that did work.
So from just kind of to summarize everything that we've been talking about so far, like what if you were to give advice to somebody who's going to school or living in Chicago and you know obviously trying to make a career out of this,
right.
what have you learned about, or what sort of advice would you give?
Right. Okay. Yeah. What the question that I did not answer was, do I recommend moving out to LA? I don't know. You know, it's like my experience. I obviously didn't, and I liked not being around the industry, at least in the beginning, where I was able to just kind of. You know, if you're just writing because you love writing, then treat it like your job, but also treat it like an art form. Like it is an art form, and it's a beautiful art form, and you should think of it as that. And I think that maybe it's easier to do that when you're not in LA. Like maybe in LA, it's a lot easier to like succumb to like, oh, this is what they're looking for. I should write one of those. And maybe that is useful too. I don't totally know. Like that certainly wasn't my experience. And
it's easy to fall victim to that. I think if you constantly are chasing what's hot or overhearing what other writers are writing and second guessing what you're writing, right? I guess that could be.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what I did was I went to a place that I really fell in love with, and I loved being in San Francisco. And I loved the people, like the community of friends that I had there, and it was just writing was kind of like my own like little personal thing that I did. And that, yeah, I don't know, like that worked for me, but it might not work for everyone. But what I will say is, again, with the Blacklist website, and like there are these tools now, and where, yeah, you don't have. I was not in LA when I like broke in, and so there are these tools now. And I think, but I would also say, as far as like the Blacklist website goes, is make sure to think of it less as this is an avenue toward me like making a career in screenwriting, and more. This is a way for me to get really great feedback on my script, and you have people read it, you know, and get a large sample size, like get 5, hopefully a handful of people reading it, and find the common denominators and figure out like how to improve the script. It's a great tool just to hone your craft, but also potentially, if you do that well, like it can lead to a success story.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think that's the key, is right, just keeping at it and keep working and making sure it's nice to get acknowledged when you are, hitting on something. One other thing I was going to ask you too was about, do you have aspirations to direct again? Because you were just saying before that, that you initially wrote some of these scripts with the idea that you were going to direct those. Is that something that you eventually might try to use screenwriting as a way to kind of parlay into a directing gig?
Yeah, totally. So I have like a script that I haven't let anyone read, like on the team yet, because I think it's bad still. Yeah. But also, it's like I still love that. It's that same first idea that I've written over and over again. And so I do like the idea of directing that at some point. Also, but I'm also like directing a short film next month I'm co-directing with another DePaul alum, and like the guy shooting it is a DePaul alum. The person casting it is a DePaul alum. We're all working professionally now, like in these various fields. But it was like time to we wanted to create like a narrative project, which a lot of us have gotten away from. And so like we got the DePaul gang back together. And it's funny, like I remember you hear about people like, oh yeah, you like rely on your film school friends all the time, but you really do. Like these are the people that you're gonna call on when you like need to do a favor, and they're going to like follow through for you. So yeah, the answer is yes. I do like to direct, and hopefully.
Have you made your representation aware of that too? Because sometimes they, like
there's
this disconnect of like, you can't direct, you're a writer.
Yeah, I was honest about it, but I was also like realistic about it. I said, listen, like I also like directed all through film school. I've over the past 5 years I've been working in production at the police department, doing like shooting things there, and so that is something that I want to do down at some point. But in the meantime, I want to concentrate on writing.
Yeah. I mean, because I think that's another positive way to break in for directing as well, as being a writer. And eventually when you reach to this level, it's a negotiating tool of saying, okay, I'm going to take less money on this script sale in exchange for allowing me to direct.
Totally,
right?
without a doubt.
We see that all the time with various writers who get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So, all right, you want to open up for questions?
Hi, my name's Andrew Morris. So a lot of kind of the word on the street, I guess, is that a lot of TV, writing now for screenwriters and television, but you write primarily feature films. What can you say about because that's something that I would like to do preferably over a writer's room. What's the, I guess, industry like, or what's the scene like for feature versus television from your experience?
I think that I would love to get into a room personally. Like, I haven't like pursued that yet. But I guess like I don't know. I think it's changing a little bit where people are going back and forth. I think like Sarah, who's on a panel after this, is like staffed on a show, but she's also writing a feature for Lionsgate. Sorry, I just told her story. So you're gonna be like, we know, Sarah. But I think honestly, when you're writing on spec and you're just writing, like, write what you want to write. And frankly, like, I think people use features as samples for writers' rooms. And right now, your focus should be like writing the best thing possible. I think that it's like in flux right now, where television is changing to the point where a lot of people are beginning to move back and forth. That said, I frankly don't know a whole lot about like the television writing side because I'm not a part of that world right now. So don't listen to anything I'm saying.
Well, you still see, but I mean, like, I guess the point is too is that features are still a viable market. Like, you're not having trouble like going on meetings and people that are clearly developing feature films, even though there's clearly is also a push towards developing a lot more TV. Right.
Right. There's a lot of TV. There are like 400 scripted television.
Was your
shows
management company pushing you on developing something for television though? That
I
think that would be an
independently. I was like, I wanted to write. The next thing I was going to do, I had this idea for a feature that like got bigger and bigger, and I was like, didn't want to be like, oh, in my mind I was like, maybe it's a trilogy, and then I was like, I can't like pitch a trilogy. So I was like, oh, I think it lives like inside of TV now, and TV is caught up to film in this way where it's like you no longer are making the same compromises that you used to, as like aesthetically. And so I said, oh, maybe this is a TV show. So I started to write the pilot, and it's super hard. Writing pilots is like this whole different thing. I was like, oh, it'll be great. It's like half as long as a feature. Super easy, twice as easy. And it's a totally different form. It's a totally different thing. And so I'm working on that when I have time on spec. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not totally sure. I think if you want to write features, then write features. And if you get to the point where that gets you repped, because it's a beautiful piece of writing, which I'm sure it is, and then your reps are like, oh yeah, and like they're just to get you a job, maybe we can try to put you into a writer's room. I promise if they say that to you, you're gonna feel like the luckiest man in the entire world, and you will go into a writer's room. So yeah, that's my guess.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Davis. I'm a screenwriting student here. You mentioned that like your first script that you had, you're still working on, and like you've had it for a long time. So I guess my question is like, how long is too long to be working on the same idea? Like if you find something that just isn't working through several revisions, like when do you just put that aside?
I don't know. That's Davis. That's a question that you have to ask yourself, I think. I don't know. You know what? It's like I think I've done for Caroline before it was option. I think I probably wrote 20 drafts of that script. For the Shotgun Bible, which is that first feature, I've done I don't know how many drafts. Time Travelers, I've now done 10 drafts, and I expect to do more, frankly, before it's over. Writing is rewriting, and it's you have to find the. But maybe if you're writing your first feature and it's just like this is not working and it's clunky, maybe that's because it's your first feature, and just not working on it anymore doesn't mean that it goes away and that you can't come back to it later. And so if you have another idea that you're kind of interested in, maybe start that, and I bet it will be easier the second time. It will continue to get easier.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Rio Fernandez. I'm a VFX major, but I mainly edit. I just started writing recently, and I have two questions. I'm sorry. So my first question is, as a student, what would you recommend in terms of writing? Do you think that we should focus more on writing short stories and getting better at that, or do you think we should tackle like a feature, and so that like because to get better at our writing, My second question is, as a writer, how do you trust like a director or an editor to like really like handle this thing that you're so passionate about? Because like, I don't know, for me, like when you write something and you give it to someone else to trust with, sometimes like it's really hard to trust somebody with that. So how do you, those are my two questions for you. Like how does that work for you?
Okay, I'm going to answer those in reverse order. I feel like a politician. I'm going to take your second part first. Listen, I think if you're really precious about your writing, then write novels. Or maybe television is your game because writers are kings in television. Film is a director's medium, and so it's your story until, and frankly, to get back to like kind of taking notes too, it's just like when somebody options a script and like you're kind of their employee now. It's like there's a lot of artistry involved in producing, and so it's kind of like changing the way that you're thinking about this project and your role in it, as opposed to being like, the father of this baby, to I don't know what the other end of that metaphor is. Trusting and kind of thinking it's like, this is their story now. When a director comes on, it's theirs, and they should be the author of this thing because they're making. I'm a writer, so it's like, but I think you do so much work on the page. But yeah, I think that without a doubt, it's their story once it's done, and they're gonna get all the credit in the blame.
Fire. That's what's depressing in the feature world sometimes. Once you make that sale, you no longer own it; it's theirs.
Totally,
and
yeah.
It's like, and if you are too combative, they'll just find another writer to replace you.
Totally.
Which is, yeah.
There, I mean, like you look at there's a podcast I listened to, the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith, I think. And it's great. They interview screenwriters, and at the end of every year, he interviews every single person on one panel, all of the people who were nominated for an Academy Award. And I remember realizing last year that they were all, there was a script that they wrote on spec. They weren't hired to write it. And frankly, I think that's a large reason why like television is so much richer right now than a lot of films are, especially like commercial films, is because writers are in charge. What was the first question?
Features or shorts?
Yeah.
As a student,
yeah.
what do you think is?
Yeah, if you have an idea for something and you think the short that I'm making right now is like can only exist as a short film, and if it could have been a feature film, I would have written it as a feature film. So if you have a story, like find what's the best vehicle for it. Maybe it's just a short story that's written in prose. Maybe it's a short film. Maybe it's a feature. Ask yourself those questions, I think, and there you shall find the answer.
I mean, jump on this quick. I think he was asking too, like in terms of what do you feel like would actually train you or develop your voice better? Is it just doing a bunch of different shorts, or is it that practice of doing the marathon of writing a feature?
Right. I mean, it's a lot of it. It's like just getting into the rhythm of scene work and building sequences. You can achieve that, and just like how to convey images on screen. You do that just getting reps, and frankly, I think that like either way, the more you do it in either form, the better you're going to get at it. So I don't know. How am I doing? Great.
That sounds, yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's John. I'm a screenwriting major, and you said something that really resonated with me as a writer, and that was that you take sort of select scenes that you have in your head and you write them down. You just get them out. And so my question for you is, how do you begin to build off of like the exposition, or like how do you formulate ideas that you need for the story off of those select scenes that you might have like had in your head?
Hold on, let me unpack that. You're asking, going from kind of like having individual scenes, like building the story from there?
Right. Yeah.
Right. I feel like I lean on what is what is the movie? What do I want the movie to make the audience feel? And through that, I'm building those scenes, and then I'm also kind of there's an internal logic to storytelling, and a certain scene will just naturally you will write it and say this feels like something that belongs in the third act, or this feels like something that will be towards the beginning. Whether it necessarily is, and frankly, like a lot of those scenes that I'm writing in the beginning, like a lot of them don't make it into the first script, the first draft anyway. But you're kind of as you're writing these scenes, it's almost just a way of like exercising your brain, having you think about the overall structure. It's like this feeling is this very abstract thing, and like you can see the movie in front of you, but it's all very blurry, and it's just slowly doing these exercises, writing these scenes. The whole thing becomes like more and more in focus until finally you can see the whole story for what it is.
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Hopefully that helped.
Hi, Tom. My name's Genevieve Rand. I'm a singer-songwriter here in Chicago. So my question is mostly related to your production background, both here and in San Francisco, and also your experiences so far in LA. What advice do you have for getting my music into films and or writing lyrics and songs made for films?
Huh. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I'm at all qualified to answer that question for you.
Okay.
I wish I could like.
Well, how about from the
flim-flam
perspective?
and
What
like-
about the perspective? Because you said you were writing a short, right? So if you were going to be considering somebody for, to score your short, what would you be looking for, or how would you? What resources would you be using to look for somebody who was creating that content or that work?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I just go to the same guy I went to in film school, Michael Holloway. Super great. Yeah. I don't know. I think I really could lie to you right now and like make something up. But the answer I would give is that I think there are a lot of probably really talented folks in this room right now who are like probably in need of music, that especially if they want to submit to like short film festivals, or they want to even like now YouTube is like annoying about like putting like commercial songs in your video and uploading them because they'll like snatch that shit out and it's annoying. So people need original music all the time, and so it's like building those networks with people who maybe can put it into their work and helping each other out.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Cool. I think that might be the last question. So do we have? I was gonna say, is it any other pieces of advice for everybody? I mean, we already kind of touched on that, but I'm just trying to think of like what else we can.
Yeah, I think that like I think I described all of screenwriting. I would think I would echo again, like it's important to write because you love it, right? Because you really love to write, like because you love the form and like the artistry of screenwriting. And I think if that's why you're writing, then things will take care of themselves.
One other thing I was going to ask you, though, is like from your time here in Chicago, and I know you've made a lot of great friends that you're clearly still working with and everything. What was like the one thing that you sort of still keep with you that you may use in your own writing, or that you still, something that you really feel like that you've learned in this environment?
From my time at DePaul? God.
Or just being in Chicago in general, but yeah.
Certainly, I mean, like, I think I was really on this like two-pronged track between performing improv and doing film. And I learned a lot of skills. I think improv informed the way I approached writing a lot because it really forces you to, like, you're constantly running through scenes, and it like develops this important muscle in a writer's toolkit to mix metaphors. To like really craft a scene and like do scene work and get good at that, and like the way that, and then frankly like communicating exposition too. It's like if you're on a stage with nothing around, you have to be like, oh yeah, this pipe, but what's an interesting way to do that on stage? And then as far as like at film school, a lot. I mean, taking the screenwriting classes here with Gary and Dan Klein and everyone that's how I learned how to do it. Mm-hmm. Frankly, yeah, like getting notes from them and.
It's interesting that you mentioned the improv stuff, because I didn't really even put that together until now of your writing process of writing out these scenes and then trying to make them into a larger thing. It just seems like that's very much of that world, at least of trying to create conflict and exposition within this one environment, and then building upon that though.
Totally, yeah. I think yeah, like I like the sound of dialogue, and I like writing dialogue. I'm not putting people inside of rooms talking, because that's like there's like 3 people in the world who can get away with that. So I'm writing movies that are like told visually. But I do I think the way I work through it the best is like as though I'm performing it. These 2 characters, like putting them in a room and getting them to talk to each other, informs me quite a bit.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Tom, for coming. We hope maybe we can
guys.
have you come.